across America. Live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. It is the Friday weekend edition. We're so grateful you can be here with us. Holly Randall, counsel of First Liberty Institute. Dr. Merrill Matthews, public policy expert. Going to talk about some religious liberty issues, as you might imagine. We're going to talk about socialism. I'm sure you would imagine that as well. A couple of very good pieces by Dr. Merrill Matthews about birth tourism as well as tariffs. But because we have Holly, I knew we had to talk about men in the WNBA, and we'll get into some other topics as well. Dr. Matthews, thank you for sitting in for me while we were there in, it was Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine. So
you were on the move.
Yeah, we were on the move, and we did do a live broadcast from New Hampshire, but thank you for the days you sat in. And Holly, let me come to you because the first article, Restore Equal Treatment to Students. I always assumed that if you were a student applying for financial aid, whether you were going to be involved in women's studies or religious studies or engineering or computers, I would think that that would be equally applied. But at least in this Commonwealth of Virginia, they don't seem to agree with us on that.
Right. Well, it's actually a nationwide problem, Kerby, because years ago, the United States Supreme Court, when it wasn't quite so great on religious liberty as it is now, decided a case called Locke versus Davey. Mm-hmm. And the decision in Locke versus Davey basically stood for the proposition that if you're accepting money from a state scholarship program, so we have one here in Texas through the Comptroller's Office. I'm from Oklahoma. We have something called Oklahoma's Promise. In Virginia, it's called VTAG, Virginia Tuition Assistance Grant. Your listeners are probably familiar with these in their state. The Locke versus Davey decision says if you're accepting money from one of those type of programs, you can use it at a Christian college, but you can't use it to get a degree in ministry, essentially. You can't use it to train yourself to be in a ministerial position. So you can't take the Virginia Tuition Assistance Grant to become a pastor. Or in Josh Davey's case, Locke versus Davey, he could not use money from the state of Washington to go train to become a priest or a pastor. So fast forward now, many years later, and Bethany Hall is a student at Liberty University, a Christian school, and she's receiving Virginia Tuition Assistance Grant. She wants to change her major to study worship arts, essentially, to become a music minister. And the Virginia state says, well, can't use your money anymore because you are going to be going into a ministerial type of position. And this is crazy, right? Think about I could use my money from the state of Texas, the state of Oklahoma, to get a college degree in history. What am I going to learn in that history degree? Probably about the beginnings of ancient history and Israel and everything that went down, kind of back in the creation of the world. But if you call that major church history and learn those same things, you cannot use state money for it. So it's an absolutely absurd result. And Bethany Hall lost in the district court and lost in the circuit court, knowing this Locke versus Davey decision does govern the case. And so First Liberty is thrilled to partner with the National Legal Foundation and Alliance Defending Freedom to tell the Supreme Court, you need to fix this. You need to overturn Locke versus Davey. You've narrowed it a lot in the past few years. It used to be way more powerful. And now the joke has kind of become the only person who is, barred by Locke versus Davey is Josh Davey himself, because you have to fit that narrow facts, but it's still affecting students like Bethany. And so what is additionally cool about it is Josh Davey did not become a member of the clergy or priest, or he did not get a religious studies degree. What did he do? He became a lawyer.
Yes.
And what is he doing now? He's representing Bethany Hall, asking the Supreme Court to overturn this case. So it's a great case for the legal nerds, because we get that kind of that justice-minded part of us is he's getting his moment to tell the Supreme Court, overturn my decision. But it's also just a great case for everyone to pay attention to, because there's people across the country that want to use programs like the money that the Texas Comptroller offers to study something like church history or worship arts, or even just get a theology degree at a Christian college. So I'm really excited. I do not have a crystal ball, but I think it will be a very attractive case for the Supreme Court. The petition is excellent that the lawyers prepared. And I think there's a lot of justices that would like to see Locke versus Davey overturned based on what they've been writing in the past. So I'm really hopeful.
It just made me thinking, and I'm just thinking out loud here. I know R.C. Sproul got his undergraduate degree in philosophy. And it made me wonder if, and this would not have applied to him, I have no idea that this would apply to him, but if some people didn't go to, say, Liberty College to get a degree in philosophy because they couldn't get it in religious studies, and then go to seminary after that, or history, as you suggest, something along those lines, which would feed into a seminary degree or a PhD in theology, but they needed the help, the financial help, so they had to pick a different topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where you get situations like Bethany Hall's case is just factually sort of fits this, because what she wants to do is become a worship leader at her church, and she wants to get a 4-year degree to support that. And it's not sort of R.C. Sproul going to go become a brilliant PhD. I mean, she is brilliant. I don't want to imply that at all. She's very talented. Yeah. And she wants to graduate in 4 years and serve her church, but she wants that Virginia tuition assistance money, and an old decision from 1990 is showing up to bring her. So kind
of like the Lemon decision that you finally had to just strangle and get rid of.
This is one of those cases, along with if you ask religious liberty lawyers, like, what are the 5 cases that need to go? Everyone would scream Lemon, and now that that's gone, we're kind of getting to move down to the rest of those, and Locke versus Davey is one of them.
Yeah. Real quickly, before we take a break, if we go to First Liberty, of course, we already posted this on our website, pointofview.net. The one that pops up is Paige Rogers, and we talked about that the other day, but I thought you might just give us an update because she's at Boyce College in Kentucky, and again, simply expressed her religious beliefs, and that's enough to get fired.
Right, yeah, and it was due to the prompting of a coworker. I mean, it just shows the craziness of the world that we live in. When someone asks you a question, we want to be able to engage and tell the truth about what we believe, but for Paige Rogers at her job, which was, and I might not pronounce this right, we don't have these coffee shops, Heine Brothers.
Mm-hmm. That sounds good.
I think that's an East Coast thing. I don't know. Maybe your listeners are better knowledgeable about coffee over there. But she was fired from her job because a coworker said, "Hey, what do you believe about this?" And she answered perfectly respectably, but told the truth, which is what we're called to do as Christians. We don't want to hide what we believe or what the Bible says is true. And it ended her. I mean, I'm so proud. She's like 19, 20, young, but smart and courageous, and didn't want to cave just to keep her job. And so I'm proud that we get to represent Paige, because I think this case is something that so many young people like her, or like Bethany Hall, who are just trying to find a way to get their education, really need to know is going on and know they can stand up for what they believe.
Well, again, just thought I'd mention those cases. And again, if you go to the website, pointofview.net, scroll down right next to Holly, you'll see a place where you can click on either, of course, the web page or Facebook or X, and find out much more about many of these cases. But I thought I would just focus on the tale of 2 co-eds on various campuses and the reason for us to defend them. So let's take a break. When we come back, our first article after that is the one on socialism and democracy. In particular, Dimitri Bolt, I quoted him the other day, "You can't have democracy without free markets. Why democratic socialism is an oxymoron." So we'll get into some of that. And then, of course, a number of very good pieces by Dr. Merrill Matthews. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Christians have always needed discernment, but we especially need to develop our skill at discernment in this confused world. One book I would recommend is Why Bad Looks Good: Biblical Wisdom to Make Smart Choices in Life, Love, and Friendship. The author is Dr. Wendy Patrick. She is a career prosecutor with not only a law degree, but a master's degree and doctorate in theology. Her book helps you avoid falling victim to hazards of misperception that she's seen in courtrooms as well as in life. For example, she warns about the deception of public perception. We live in a world where abnormal is portrayed as normal. It is easy to follow the crowd right off the cliff. That is why her chapter begins with 2 Corinthians 4:4, where Paul reminds us that the God of this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers. Another chapter talks about when bad becomes beautiful. She has seen this in her experience in prosecuting sexual predators. That is why she begins that chapter with John 7:24, where Jesus admonishes the disciples to stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly. Another chapter advises us to use discernment when bad sounds good. We live in a world where smooth talkers can convince us and our friends of ideas that are counter to biblical wisdom. We should also be alert to the dark side of praise. Psalm 55:21 warns us about people whose talk is smooth as butter. Another chapter explains how to react when bad feels good. We live in a world that emphasizes emotion over logic and flash over substance. Ecclesiastes 1:8 warns us that the eye never has enough of seeing. If you want to improve your skill at discernment, I recommend you get a copy of her book. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's, if we can, get into the issue of socialism, and in particular, this piece of democracy without free markets. Now, I'll be the first to admit that sometimes a free market is a necessary but not sufficient condition for democracy. His argument is those two are very significantly linked. But as we've said before, if you limit a person's economic freedom, by definition, you pretty much limit their political freedom. So I would love to get some thoughts on that. But first of all, we, if nothing else, Holly, have had an interesting week in which we had some socialists that were elected. The governor of the gubernatorial candidate, I should say, for Wisconsin was not elected. But it does seem to me that socialism is still on the rise, isn't it?
Yes, and it is unfortunately on the rise among people that are my age, which is just so silly. I mean, I don't know if where they went to school didn't teach them of like, here's who lost the Cold War. Probably you don't want to be on their team. But maybe that was omitted from the curriculum.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seems silly. It's something that I think we've talked about this on the show before. It's financially harder in some ways. I'm not going to get into the $20 burrito discussion that went down on Twitter this week, but it is harder now for younger people financially than, say, our parents, grandparents.
For
I think we can all kind of accept
that.
But unfortunately, instead of instilling a hard work mentality in people my age of I'm going to go make something of myself and survive this brutal economy, it's like dipping into this sort of whiny socialism desire where we just demand money from people that have more of it than us instead of being inspired to make it ourselves. And I don't know, there's probably some psychological or long studied reason why that the younger crowd is engaging in that behavior. It just seems like it's really attractive to the 20, 30 somethings, and it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, that's the case, and as we were talking about off air, one of the things I found out about this in the Wisconsin case, 38 states, both the two winners or the two top people had in the 39%. There's a separation of what, 300,000. It wasn't a big separation.
No,
they were both in 39%.
Relatively close.
So
it wasn't
very
supposed
close.
to be, which shows polls don't mean anything either. We'll get to that in a minute.
That's right. But so neither one of them got 50%. 50% or more. And I was looking at this and I thought, of course, in Texas, when we had the primary with John Cornyn and Ken Paxton, you had a third candidate in there who won. So neither Paxton nor Cornyn got 50% of the vote. So you had a primary runoff.
Yes.
6 weeks later, 2 months later, something like that. So you know that you had 50% or more of the people who voted in that wanted a particular candidate. In Wisconsin, you don't have that. 38 states, you win the primary by having a plurality, not a majority of the vote.
I did not know that.
And so as I thought about this, I thought, 39% is pretty good. I wouldn't be too concerned about if it was 48 or 49%, but you can conceivably have somebody where somebody wins the primary with 31 or 32%, the next person has 25, and then you have 3 or 4 more candidates that got 15 or 20% or something like that. And so we don't know how all those others voted. I mean, what they wanted. They may not have wanted the socialist candidate, but maybe they did if they had a primary runoff. So it's interesting. We don't know where this goes now because you had several other candidates who got a good portion of that vote.
Some of our listeners are in South Carolina, and they're well aware of the fact there were 10 candidates, one of which was the sister, of course, of Lindsey Graham. And if you didn't have a runoff, I mean, you could have split those plurality, and somebody could, quote, win with 15% of the vote,
16,
something like
Which
that.
is crazy. I mean, that just seems like absolutely not what our whole system is built on.
Yeah.
But
It's a fairly small number. I think 9 states require a 50% majority, and then 3 states have what we call a jungle primary. So
yes.
The top 2 or top 3 or 4 are taken out of that. But yes, it means that in an awful lot of states you have somebody who could win a primary with a fairly low representation of the popular vote, and that's a little concerning to me, especially since you don't know where those voters who didn't choose the top person were going to go. So in Wisconsin, 39%, you had 61% who didn't vote for the winner. That's a big number, and we don't know where they will go. Could they go to the Republican? Could they go to something else? You just don't know.
Well, that's, I guess, why you see, and now I'm sort of figuring this out live on air with our viewers, why you see Libertarian Party, Progressive Party, the DSA parties pushing for these types of primary systems in states. I know Oklahoma just had a big push to basically eliminate partisan primaries and do one of these like everybody all at once because
jungle primaries.
Yeah, jungle primaries. It takes less votes to win, and so you're more likely to elect candidates from these fringe Democratic Socialist parties or whatever. It's an interesting play on the system.
Very good fact there from Dr. Merrill Matthews. Let me just, since I did mention polls, the polls had said that Francesca Hong was going to win going away. And not only did she not win, it was really close. And one of the things that I say quite often, Holly, is the only poll that really matters happens in November, or in this case, the only poll that really matters happened in August, because some of these polls are so way off, and there's a good example of it.
Yeah, well, so every time that I have been able to vote for a president, we have all known that polls don't work, because the first election I voted in was 2016.
Yeah,
so I have never once in my life voted in an election where a poll has ever shown us anything of any, any knowledgeability. So I'm just kind
skeptical.
of, I've grown up, I've voted and grown up in this era of like, well, I don't have any trust in the polls. But I mean, I think sounds like they used to be pretty reputable, that we could kind of predict the outcome. That's just not been my experience.
There's a whole discussion going on among pollsters as to how we do this, because most people don't have landlines anymore.
That's
I still do, but
go.
most people don't. They have their cell phones. Many people don't answer their cell phones, especially older people. I tend not to do if I don't recognize it, but younger people may. So one of the questions is, are we getting a disproportionate share of younger people answering the phone and therefore doing the poll? And that might tend to lead more towards a socialist candidate or a Democratic candidate or something of that nature. And pollsters are just really struggling trying to figure out, how do we get scientifically accurate polls? And sometimes they hit it right. but it's a real struggle within the polling community.
Again, you might remember with the USA Radio Network. Remember John Clemens and everything?
Absolutely.
We said, okay, which polls would we trust? And one of those was the Rasmussen poll, which tend to be a little bit right of center. Another person I tend to quote left of center is Nate Silver. Again, he's written some things on that, and actually in the 2016 predicted accurately the vote totals in 49 of the 50 states. So there are some good polls out there, but I think it just illustrates, again, be a little bit skeptical, or in this case, in Holly's case, be really skeptical about some of these polls.
I get poll fatigue, too. I mean, talk about having primaries and runoffs. If I get one more text message about the Texas runoffs, I'm going to throw my phone into a lake. I think it's just it's constant.
And one of the reasons why you hear so many people going to the Real Clear average of polls.
There you go.
There they take all the polls, because there's a lot of polls out there, and they'll kind of take an average of that. And it may not be able to give you the exact outcome, but you can sometimes see a trend.
See the trend.
Yes. And 5 or 6 months ago, the trend for the generic congressional vote was about 5 or 6% Democratic, went down to 3 or 4%. Lately, it's gone back up to, I think I saw about 7% here lately. So you sort of look at the trends and you can get an idea of where things may be going.
If nothing else, I did want to mention this article because it's just a reminder that if indeed you want a free society, you really need a free economy. If the government can determine exactly how much you can pay individuals, what the prices are, and everything else, then you, of course, limit the amount of political freedom. And I've got a commentary coming out next week in which someone did a really interesting study of East Berlin and West Berlin. Two different grocery stores just 20 miles apart. One grocery store in East Berlin had about 3,000 particular items, only one type of mustard, not even spicy mustard. The prices were determined by the Politburo in Moscow. The other one in West Berlin had more than 7,000 products because they were competing with 3 other grocery chains. And then it goes on to point out that the people in West Berlin lived longer than the people in East Berlin. The people in West Berlin were healthier than the people in East Berlin. And interesting enough, the people in West Berlin had a lot more freedom than the people in East Berlin. And that might just be a historical fact for Holly, but Dr. Merrill Matthews, you and I remember when we actually had a Berlin Wall.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And we remember when the president said, tear this wall down.
And we know what kind of mustard that Kerby likes on his sandwiches.
I just thought I'd mention one kind of mustard in Germany.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to Germany? Sauerkraut, hot dogs, of course, you can see one kind of mustard, one kind of car, by the way, in East Berlin.
And after
East
the
Germany.
Olympics, they may have ranch dressing because they found out about
The world has ranch dressing.
Yeah. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention that there are some really interesting studies coming out, just reminding at least the younger people that Holly's been talking about the dangers and the problems of socialism. Okay, WNBA. We'll talk about that right after this.
Who can you trust? Years ago, many of us could probably have provided a fairly long list, but today it seems we almost can't trust anyone. Educators don't even know what a woman is anymore. Many so-called public servants have shown all they care about is themselves. The FBI has been accused of bias, law-breaking, betrayal, and journalism. It's largely corrupt, with no Clark Kent standing up for truth, justice, and the American way. All of this is why Point of View Radio is more important than ever, and your part in supporting us is more needed than ever. Do your part today in supporting trustworthy truth. Stand with us and help push back the lies and the darkness. Visit pointofview.net. Don't put it off. Take a moment right now and click on that big blue button that says Donate Now, or call to invest at 1-800-347-5151, pointofview.net, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let me just mention that we have posted quite a number of articles that we will get into, and I thought we've been postponing it long enough. I did earlier in the week talk about the WNBA, and we've on 2 different occasions talked about some of the events surrounding Sophie Cunningham. I'll leave it at that. And also, of course, Caitlin Clark. But now you also have some individuals that I think we could all agree are men that nevertheless are going to make themselves available for the WNBA draft. And I knew we had to talk about that because Holly Randall has been a college athlete. She, of course, has followed some of these individuals. And I have been waiting all week for you to give us some comments.
Yeah, I was excited when I saw this one on the menu. Enes Kanter,
yes,
who I believe uses the name Enes Kanter Freedom now.
Freedom.
I know him as Enes Kanter from his days playing with the Oklahoma City Thunder in my hometown. And it's interesting to mention when he played there, he and another teammate of his used the nickname to call the two of them the Stash Bros, referring to their very full mustaches, which is now funny that Enes Kanter, one of the Stash Bros, is declaring for the WNBA draft. Yeah. I think it just adds to the absurdity of this all. And then there's another man, I think his name is Royce Young, that's doing the same sort of play. I think it's a brilliant move on their behalf because it illustrates the absurdity of this all, right? Like, Enes Kanter is a big dude. He is no longer in the NBA. He's probably 6'10", just muscled up, and his playing career against men is over. But he would dominate in the WNBA. I mean, on a women's net or a women's goal with a women's ball, no one would have a chance to play against him because they could just stick him on the, down by the goal and it'd be in the basket before anyone even knew what happened. So I'm thankful that he is doing this effort to sort of call out the WNBA, the women's.
That's what the W stands for, I believe.
National Basketball Association is refusing to sort of define what womanhood means for that league when the answer is like incredibly biologically simple. The people that we are missing in this I think fight against transgenderism in sports, and I hope that Enes Kanter's efforts spur this on, is the coaches. I would love to hear more coaches getting engaged on this issue at all levels, college, professional, high school. We need a WNBA coach to say, yes, I'm drafting that person because I want to win basketball games. And we need that WNBA coach to say, yep, you're on the starting line. Let's go. Time to play. To really just, we have to acknowledge the absurdity of this and play into it to put a stop to it. And it's coming at the perfect time after the Supreme Court's decision in BPJ this summer, where they said it is not a Title IX violation to require biological men to play men's sports and biological women to play women's sports. So I think we should just take that wind at our backs and all run with Enes Kanter, and we need a coach to join in, and this is the way to approach this problem.
My understanding is that even though it is the Women's National Basketball Association, they're saying that they do not define women in there. And we've got a Supreme Court justice who, in her hearing, was asked about that, and she said, well, I'm not a biologist, so I can't define what a woman is. So it's interesting to see that this will happen because it's either going to force, and the NBA, a lot of the people who watch the WNBA are upset about all this. I think the WNBA crowd, I mean, women's sports, and this is maybe an oversimplification, women's sports and fans of women's sports sort of trend liberal. I think that's probably fair.
That's probably fair,
I would say that matches some of the demographic that watches women's sports, which is very heavily in the LGBT movement, which is why I think there is some hesitance on the WNBA's part to take this stand, because they know a lot of their viewers. Right. A lot of their viewers may feel alienated. And I can understand them not wanting to alienate women from sports. I think biological girls playing sports is an incredibly good thing and can create opportunities for them and build skills for them and teach them how to become productive, high-performing adults. But so I understand that they don't want to alienate that, but they're going to, at the risk of alienating part of their crowd, ruin women's sports for girls altogether by allowing men to participate. So I think I saw a commentator that was telling, it was either Enes Kanter or Royce Young, like, well, if you're going to do this, you need to go the whole 9 yards, and you need to take, feminine hormones, and you need to do all of this, whatever is necessary, they say, for transgender women. And he said, don't tell me how to be a woman. And I just thought that was a great reply, because it's like, we're finally putting it back, the craziness back on people to put a stop to it.
And the interesting thing is, this comes at a time when the WNBA is having a moment. I mean, Caitlin Clark and Paige Beckers and some of these have really drawn a large audience, and it's allowing the women in basketball to get paid more, to be able to fly on separate planes and do a whole bunch of things that they wouldn't have been able to do 15, 20 years ago when nobody viewed it.
Yeah, and money talks in sports. And so I remember some of the first things I ever talked about on the show was the boycott of Target.
Yes.
When they started selling like crazy transgender stuff to kids. And we talked a lot about how our dollars speak. And so I think the WNBA is seeing an influx of money right now on people interested in the sport. It's getting attention. And I think people need to consider, okay, if they're not going to define what a woman is, then I guess I'm just going to have to watch only the NBA. I don't know.
What about the person that has been willing to define it, and that's Sophie Cunningham.
Yeah.
Now, she's a guard for the Indiana Fever, on the same team, of course, with Caitlin Clark, in which she says, look, I'm here to extend love, but I also think that love is truth, being honest. I want to protect young girls in a locker room, young girls in a sport that shouldn't have to go against biological men. That's something that at least 80% of the country says makes good sense, and yet get a little, just a perspective on how they've treated her and how they've treated young girls that have shown up signs to actually support her in the stands. I mean, you've had an owner even go and chew these young girls out because they are so thrilled that Sophie Cunningham said the obvious.
Right, yeah. She's been great on this issue and speaking up about this is important for young girls to see women, actual women playing a sport and have something like that to look up to. A fun fact about Sophie Cunningham, she was a kicker on her high school football team, which is an interesting part of the equation here.
Yes.
She played in one game and went 2 for 4 after the team's kicker got injured. So I think that's an interesting point to make. An interesting nuance here is because she has played a traditionally male sport. She did not have to be a male to do that, right? Like, she understands that there are differences, but women can do anything they want. We just have to be able to keep girls and female athletes safe while they're playing and accept truth and understand biology in the meantime.
Speaking of safe, of course, she got clotheslined the other day. So it's getting violent enough some days in the WNBA without bringing on Mr. Freedom or anybody else, right?
Yeah, right. We don't need a 6'10", 200 pounds of pure muscle man out there to injure the women. They're doing a scary enough job of it themselves, which should also give everyone pause on inviting 2 men into the league anyway. It's just, I've said it enough. It's insanity.
And it raises the question, though, is the WNBA moving towards the hockey model? Where we sort of have the joke, I went to a fight and a hockey game broke out.
Because you're seeing a lot of clips, and they're really coming after Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark and a few others.
And it might. I have no idea what the WNBA people are thinking, the professionals there who run the thing, but they might be saying, we're getting a lot of attention here and we're drawing a lot of views, and maybe that's actually helping us.
Yeah. Maybe they're taking the no press is bad press approach, it seems like. Because they had an opportunity, they had a meeting, I think, earlier this week to do something, right? An emergency meeting of the board or something, whomever. And it seems as if they sort of passed on a opportunity to take a stand. So
I did post this article, and again, it shows the picture of the WNBA commissioner, Kathy Engelbert, who says, well, we've just had meetings on a wide range of topics, including ongoing discussions on transgender athletes and continued hate and vitriol directed at players online. And we will eventually continue to engage all league stakeholders in the coming weeks and months. Boy, is that a bureaucratic statement or what? In other words, we're going to make a decision not to make a decision.
Yeah, it should have just been women play in the WNBA.
That's it.
Period.
And simple enough.
Done. It's in the name.
It's in the name. It's just unbelievable. Well, let's take a break. And when we come back, Dr. Matthews, let me put you on the spot because you have talked about 3 cheers for trying to end birth tourism. And, of course, the president had issued an executive order to stop, of course, even birthright citizenship. That did not go well. But he also has an executive order to stop or at least limit the practice of birth tourism. And you give us some facts and figures, some of which I've heard, but you've dug them into it a little bit more in terms of the fact that there are birth tourism packages. So I think you want to pay attention to this. And as always, find some of these articles because in this case, Dr. Merrill Matthews has done the research and it is something you can find on the Hill, but it is our 3rd article on the website. We'll be right back.
Blue cities throughout the U.S. are struggling. Sometimes their solutions are making their problems worse. Conservative scholar and journalist Christopher Rufo convened 4 focus groups with voters in Los Angeles and San Francisco. He and his team were trying to find out how to persuade voters to support policies that will truly help their cities. They found that terminology is important. The use of phrases such as illegal aliens and law and order are seen as right-wing coded terms which can immediately shut down constructive discussion. Better, he says, to define problems as rooted in failures of care and concern. What Mr. Rufo's team gleaned from these focus groups is that it's important to frame the issue carefully and then offer common-sense solutions that will survive in progressive urban settings that are most in need of sound conservative governance. Case in point, San Francisco. When Daniel Lurie became mayor in 2025, the city was plagued with carjackings, robberies, gun assaults, smash-and-grab shoplifting, and homeless encampments. A tool that might have helped solve the crime problem was prohibited in 2019, when San Francisco became the first major city to ban police from using facial recognition technology. Crime shot up, exacerbating the exodus of families and businesses from the Bay Area. In an article for the Washington Post, San Francisco real estate investor Max Raskin says, Mayor Lurie, a Democrat, has eased restrictions on the use of drones and facial recognition for law enforcement, effectively reversing the 2019 ordinance, and passed a kitchen sink ballot initiative that gave flexibility to the city's police department. Mayor Lurie also launched an initiative to increase police hiring and has worked in cooperation with federal and state officials to get drugs and dealers off the streets. This Democrat mayor of the country's most liberal city is implementing the conservative principle that says if you get crime right, everything else will follow. Max Raskin says it's working. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In studio, Holly Randall, as well as Dr. Merrill Matthews. And Merrill Matthews, let me come to you. 3 cheers for trying to end birth tourism. You have first cheer, second cheer, third cheer. But in some respects, the benefit of this is to help people understand that this is not hypothetical. It is something that President Trump has been concerned about. He actually has an executive order about the practice of having people come here to give birth here, since we are certainly granting birthright citizenship to individuals. And so talk about this, because there is birth tourism packages and all sorts of things that people learn about as they read your article.
Right. So birthright tourism birth tourism and birthright citizenship are two different things.
Yes.
Birth tourism sort of comes under the broader mantle of birthright citizenship. So the president tends to talk about these two things at the same time, and the media tend to sort of dismiss both of them in a sense. But the Supreme Court has ruled that the 14th Amendment does allow for birthright citizenship. But what's happened, and this has been happening for decades, is that pregnant women in other countries, especially Mexico, China, even Russia and others, I mentioned some, Taiwan and so, their pregnant women tend to want to come over here on a visa, have the child becomes a American citizen, and then they're going back. A lot of these are upper income, wealthy foreign women who want to come over and have a child here, built that becomes an American citizen. And so I cite in the piece, this goes back to, you can go back to Arizona doing this in 2009. There was an article that they had in the Arizona paper back then where they talk about, and I'm quoting now, one package advertised, quote, $2,300 for a vaginal birth for a 2-day stay. This is at a spa. $4,600 for a C-section for a 4-day stay. And I didn't leave this in there, but if you have an extra have two babies, it's $500 for each extra child that comes in.
Oh my goodness! Yeah.
And so those prices don't sound high, but this was 18 years ago, and this is where they paid cash for this. But others, the O'Neill Institute at Georgetown Law, and I'm quoting, women from foreign countries, mainly from China and Russia, are paying tens of thousands of dollars to temporarily relocate to the U.S. during their pregnancy in order to give birth to in the U.S. and thereby guarantee U.S. citizenship for their child. And the Guardian newspaper, that's a London paper, I'm quoting them as saying $30,000 for Chinese women, paying $30,000 to $100,000 to buy a birth tourism package. And then I mentioned Leslie Tai. She's a Chinese-American documentary filmmaker. She has made a film. I've got a link to the trailer on YouTube, How to Have an American Baby. And she follows around Chinese people, and she has English subtitles here, as they're meeting in China, talking about how to come over here. They come over here, have the baby becomes an American citizen, then they oftentimes go back home. So this isn't like birth citizenship where illegal immigrants are coming over, working, having babies, and then they want those babies to become American citizens. These are mainly higher income people from foreign countries who come over, have the baby, then go back home, and then if something happens, this is kind of sort of an anchor or a peg. If they're forced out of the country, they say, we've got a child who's an American citizen, let's go there and try to stay in America because we've got an American citizen as a child. And we're talking about people who spend $30,000 to $100,000 to come, in many cases, to spas that are walled off so that other people can't go in there. They have the baby, and then they go back to their native country.
And that gets us into then chain migration, because once the child is an American citizen, you bring the child over here, then the mother, the father, the aunts, uncles, whatever, and that just shows you the value of an American citizenship.
Yeah, what's amazing about this is, I guess I need to be more financially thankful to have been born at St. Francis Hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I didn't know people were paying so much money. I guess you know about it in theory, but I thought this article was interesting because it's just really, it's an advertised market in other parts of the world. And what's amazing about that, and what you kind of have to, while being a little bit outraged at sort of what's happening because of the 14th Amendment, in some ways you have to be thankful of, like, our country is still a place that people really want to go to, and will shell out lots of money to be an American citizen. And you hear so many people, I'm going to go after the young people again. Here I am, alienating my community probably. So many people complain about this country. They complain about what's wrong with it and all the, they want to be democratic socialists and they think we're doing things better over in Russia. And there's so much of that you hear, but there's a little piece when you're reading an article like this that's like, man, America is still an amazing place that people want to be a part of, and they want to have that, and they want ranch dressing to go on all of the, and we have that, and we're going to pay $100,000 for it, but it's so much more than that, right? It's freedom and it's economic liberty and it's religious liberty and it's all of the things that make our country special and unique. And it's just, it makes me grateful that we got that for free. Not for free, but no one in my family had to pay $100,000
That's
for
right.
that.
That's right.
But it's amazing.
Under one estimate, so the question is how many people do this? Under one estimate, it's about 33,000. Under a newer estimate from 2023 alone, it was about 70,000. So these aren't huge. I mean, they're in some ways big numbers. They're not anywhere near the number of people who were coming across and having babies here. On the other hand, these people are not becoming wards of the state because they tend to be wealthy and they're going back. And I find it interesting that Democrats tend to sort of just ignore this. Well, there's not that many people.
Make fun of it.
Make fun of it. Yeah, it doesn't really happen. It does happen. And the interesting thing is these are wealthy people who are abusing the system. And you would normally think Democrats would say, well, here's the wealthy people just sort of ignoring the laws once again. They tend to just ignore this and pass on it, don't want to really say much about it at all.
Let's say we can talk about that for a minute because I said off air, but I need to say it on air. Years ago, some of the individuals that we had around the table, one of them, Representative Louis Gohmert, had mentioned that comment in Congress, and they just laughed and laughed and laughed about it. I was watching one the other day where this was brought up on CNN, and again, they just laugh and think, oh, this is silly. There's nothing to it. I had a producer that used to work for us here, and he thought, this isn't even a big issue. I don't even know why we're talking about it. You just gave me some numbers that say, it's a little more significant than some of the people are giving it credit for.
Right. If you're talking about 70,000 people a year, over 10 years, it ends up being quite a few American citizens living in other places. And like I said, they're not applying for welfare benefits and so forth. So they're coming into special places, having the child, it becomes an American citizen, they get that citizenship certificate, and they leave, they go back home. But then they are essentially, I guess, call it a piggy bank. If something happens in their country, and some of these countries are not great countries, they may feel like they can come back and say, my child's an American citizen, we need to be able to stay here, and that gives them some kind of extra benefit if they're claiming asylum or something of that nature.
Well, just think, too, if you are one of those children and then you grow up and you say, I think I will go to college in the United States, and so I'll go to Kansas citizen. Or I'll go to UC Berkeley, or I'll go to, if I can get into Yale or something like that. And then I can also vote because I'm already an American citizen. I don't even have to go through naturalization or anything. I may have grown up my entire life under the Chinese communist and maybe even be a communist agent. But guess what? I have American citizenship, and I bring all those ideas, and I'm instantaneously able to vote in the next election and run for office.
It hasn't crossed my mind, but if they're 20 or 21, they might be able to vote by mail.
There are just a lot of issues here. If nothing else, if you run into, and I have run into people, not even people that worked here at the radio network that say, I don't think this is a big issue. Well, Dr. Merrill Matthews, you've done some yeoman's work here. You got first cheer, second cheer, third cheer, and it just talks about the need to address this issue. And I think isn't fair that Trump did try to address it in the first term, and now is trying to address it now. So we have a lot more to cover. We will get to Democrats and religious voting and a variety of other things right after these important messages.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult, and that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this. Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to get into some things that are going to affect the midterms. And in studio with us today, Holly Randall, Merrill Matthews. And I might just mention that this article is one that Dr. Matthews identified, and I thought it was a very good piece that comes out of the Wall Street Journal, Inside the Democrats' Push to Win Back Religious Voters. And it relates very much to the booklet that I've put together and will be going out shortly. It's the September issue of our booklet. It has the title Woke Christianity. Now, the reason I did that was because we recognize that we in the past have written something on wokeness, but there are a couple of new wrinkles, one of which is we have some members of Congress that are pastors. There are some other individuals that are seminary trained that are running, all on the Democratic Party. And so in addition to whether or not you're getting wokeness from the pulpit, sometimes you're getting wokeness from the podium, if you will, as candidates are out there speaking to some of those issues. So I thought I'd just mention that will be in the mail for those of you that are Truth Team members. It's just a good illustration of the kinds of topics we're addressing. But Dr. Matthews, you found this particular piece, which goes back to Iowa, and I've used Iowa in the past because it is a somewhat religious state. But it also has been pretty much more of a Democratic-leaning state. So in this particular case, the candidate recognizes, well, let's just put the two together. There we go.
Yep. And because my wife comes from Iowa, I get to Iowa fairly often. And once you get outside of Des Moines and some of the college areas, it's a very conservative group. These farmers are very, very conservative, and many of them are evangelicals.
Sure.
So yes, the Democrats sort of were just separating themselves from the evangelical and strongly religious vote some years ago, and I think we mentioned around 2012 or so at the Democratic Convention.
Oh, yes.
There was a motion to put the word God in their platform, and they said, this is widely booed, we're not going to do that. And that's changing now, because Kamala Harris had the Evangelicals for Harris website, where there were some evangelicals, people who claimed to be evangelicals, who said they were voting for Kamala. Kamala said, she sort of aligned with evangelicals or conservative Christianity, and saying she was a Christian, and also saying that the Good Samaritan, and this is where the issue of the Good Samaritan being able to help the poor oftentimes comes in among liberals, because, and I wrote about this at the time, yes, there is a biblical injunction that we should be helping the poor, we should be helping those who are less privileged than ourselves, but that is an individual charge. There is nothing in the Bible that says I should go to my government and say, you need to take other people's tax money and help these individuals. So what I see from this is the effort by Democrats to say we want to care about the poor, and that's our Christian duty. And therefore, I'm going to go and vote for policies that take taxpayers' money rather than taking the what I consider to be Jesus's imperative is you as an individual should be caring for them and helping them, not you should be transferring that obligation to the government to do it.
One of the things I thought I'd just ask Holly about is you have to get to about the third page before this comment is just almost thrown out of nowhere, and that is the expansion of some of this was in reaction to the so-called far-right initiatives like displaying the Ten Commandments in schools. And so I thought the trigger point was posting the Ten Commandments in the schools?
Yeah, I think that a part of this is a symptom of I don't know if symptom is even the right word, but in the Donald Trump years, there was this reaction that affected a lot of pastors that I look up to, people like Tim Keller before he passed, started sort of engaging in politics in a way that was, I don't agree with Donald Trump on this thing, or people that used to be sort of staunch conservatives like David French have opposed things like Ten Commandments in the classroom. So you've had this kind of interesting pull away of some groups in reaction maybe to Trump, some evangelicals in reaction maybe to Trump. And I don't know what's quite caused that, but it's made this vacuum where I think Democrats can run a candidate like James Tallarico that says things, like trans people need abortion care and God asked Mary for her consent before he, made her pregnant with Jesus. Right? Yeah. Like that's where you get this, and people are generally becoming more and more biblically illiterate, and they're not knowing the truth of the Bible, so they're falling for misinterpretations, like someone like James Tallarico saying stuff that's just biblically inaccurate, but packaging it in this nice evangelical bow, and maybe someone is grown up in the church and feels comfort by the institution, but is moving away from the far right. I don't know. There's a weird movement going on right now that's kind of making this squishy middle moderate voter be really swayed by someone like James Tallarico.
And it has affected things, and we have to admit Donald Trump came with some baggage, and not everybody was pleased with that baggage. Yeah. And so they, as they've pushed against Trump, it has opened a door for Democrats. But what's happening among Democrats is that they are looking at this and saying, there's people out here. We need to win some of the white evangelical voters. They get a large portion of the black religious people, whether evangelicals or not, and they feel like they are not going to be able to win unless they pull some of those evangelical voters, because the evangelical voters tend to go out and vote, and so it's a demographic that Democrats want to be able to say we're trying to attract them with some of these people. But it's interesting. Most of the people who they have as pastors, Raphael Warnock and so forth, I would call them very liberal people. Mm-hmm. They're liberal in everything across the board. And that's just not going to appeal, and especially with abortion, and that's just not going to appeal to an awful lot of evangelicals.
Yeah.
Well, and again, we do mention some of those individuals there. One other issue is they talk about, of course, the baggage issue, and that's best illustrated by the book, if you've ever seen it. Yeah, I've seen it almost at every Barnes & Noble, Jesus and John Wayne, which is all about, of course, the issue of the Christian right has too associated themselves with the Republican Party. But the flip side is, again, something on page 3 where it talks about the biggest issue for Democrats is even if you're trying to bring some religious language or some faith-based language into the Democratic Party, you still have to account for all the radicals out here. And that gets us back to the article just a few minutes ago on socialism.
Yeah, I went to a college that was very taken with this woke Christian movement, and I took and now I'm really going to be revealing things about myself. I took a critical theory class in college because it was a small class and you were stuck with what they offered those semesters. And we read a book called, and remind you, this is a Christian college. We read a book called Deer Hunting for Jesus, and it was all about how it was kind of a case study on the Appalachian part of the country, and it was like, these people should be Democrats because they need all these the government services that the Democrat Party advocates for, but they're too blinded by their evangelicalism to realize that they should be Democrats. And I feel like we are seeing a movement now, 10 years later from when I read that book in class, that some people took the message of that book or took the message of Jesus and John Wayne and are trying to package it into candidates like Raphael Warnock and James Tallarico. And I pray it doesn't work.
Well, we've got to take a break, but if nothing else, it's just a good illustration. Of course, we have the vice president also talking about the hillbilly elegy and and then talking about his conversion. So the religion is going to be in the midterms, and I think the particular commentary that I have today is on the subject of discernment. Maybe that's a good reason to read the commentary and even one of the books I recommend, because you're going to need some discernment to think through all the various comments that are going to be made during the campaign. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Christians have always needed discernment, but we especially need to develop our skill at discernment in this confused world. One book I would recommend is Why Bad Looks Good, Biblical Wisdom to Make Smart Choices in Life, Love, and Friendship. The author is Dr. Wendy Patrick. She is a career prosecutor with not only a law degree, but a master's degree and doctorate in theology. Her book helps you avoid falling victim to hazards of misperception that she's seen in courtrooms as well as in life. For example, she warns about the deception of public perception. We live in a world where abnormal is portrayed as normal. It is easy to follow the crowd right off the cliff. That is why her chapter begins with 2 Corinthians 4:4, where Paul reminds us that the God of this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers. Another chapter talks about when bad becomes beautiful. She has seen this in her experience in prosecuting sexual predators. That is why she begins that chapter with John 7:24, where Jesus admonishes the disciples to stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly. Another chapter advises us to use discernment when bad sounds good. We live in a world where smooth talkers can convince us and our friends of ideas that are counter to biblical wisdom. We should also be alert to the dark side of praise. Psalm 55:21 warns us about people whose talk is smooth as butter. Another chapter explains how to react when bad feels good. We live in a world that emphasizes emotion over logic and flash over substance. Ecclesiastes 1:8 warns us that the eye never has enough of seeing. If you want to improve your skill at discernment, I recommend you get a copy of her book. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio, Holly Randall and Dr. Merrill Matthews. Let me just mention for a minute, as I've said it before, sometimes we should keep the microphones on during the break. Some of the best comments happen during the break. And one of those, Holly, was about the fact that oftentimes a particular religious group will be identified as something that then should be used against everyone else. And a classic example is if I can find a Baptist who says, I have no problem with same-sex marriage, I have no problem as a Baptist of forcing an individual to actually craft a cake for a same-sex communion or wedding or anything of that nature, then they can go to other Baptists and say, well, what's wrong with you? Here's Baptist, and we've seen this in the Catholic Church, we've seen it in the Protestant denominations as well, and that's another aspect of when we start just confusing people with all sorts of religious language, which is, if you will, superimposed upon this wokeism. It's going to be very confusing, hence one of the reasons we put this booklet together, just to remind ourselves that in some respects, wokeism is sort of fading away from the businesses. Mm-hmm. You know, dare I mention Bud Light or any of the others, or Target or a variety of others. But it's alive and well in the political realm and unfortunately in some churches, and it's used against you sometimes when you're trying to defend religious liberty.
Yeah, I was sharing during the break, Dr. Matthews was mentioning we're going to get to the point where we're going to be started doing this religious besting game almost, and using them as cards to play against each other. And I think what I was sharing was that we see this all the time already in our cases. So you have someone that does not want to make a cake for a same-sex couple. They don't want to use the skills that God has given them as an artist to bless something that they believe is a marriage that's not biblical. And the Constitution, the United States Constitution, absolutely gives them that right. We have a freedom to believe in America and not to be compelled to do actions and engage in speech that we disagree with. But there is always, in those type of situations, someone challenging that says, well, I'm a Christian too, and my faith will let me make this cake. Or I'm a Christian too, and my faith would require me to make that cake because it's sinful to be mean to those people. And we see this all the time in our litigation, and it always becomes this game of, well, my faith. And I think that really misses the point when we're litigating a religious liberty case. We're not litigating the truth of someone's belief or lack of truth in someone's belief. We as Christians know what we believe and know what we think is true. But when we're in front of a judge, we're talking about, what does the Constitution allow? Well, what it allows is exactly what the person objecting is saying. We have a litany of beliefs here in America. Our Constitution allows for this woke brand of Christianity, whether like it or not. And I think that's Christians' obligation to be missional and to educate people about biblical truth. But this hammer that gets used so often against Christians that is, well, my faith would let me do that thing. Well, my faith wouldn't let me put the 10 Commandments up in the classroom. And my faith would make me make that cake. It's like, yeah, thank you for proving our point. We have freedom of religion in this country to all believe different things, and we can't be compelled to do it against that. So it's an interesting way that it's worked its way also into our litigation sphere.
You know, I suspect the Christian aspect is going to play out here in Texas some more, because you've got James Tallarico, who has some unusual beliefs, let's say, but he's a seminary graduate, claims to be a Christian, and doesn't seem to have a lot of baggage in his personal baggage in his life, whereas he's going against Ken Paxton, who claims to be an evangelical, but he does have a lot of baggage there. Sure. And if you're just the average voter and you're looking at this and you're saying, here's James Tallarico, who he says some things I haven't heard before, but he seems to have a fairly normal, clean life, and Ken Paxton, who has some issues, especially his wife and other things, it's going to make it difficult for some voters to say, if I want to vote for the Christian, who do I vote for?
I think what's sort of sad for me to see, and both sad and kind of personally challenging, is that what you can see these people that buy into this woke Christianity, you can tell that they have something in their heart or in their mind that is yearning for creator and truth, and they are trying to find it, and they're finding it in all the wrong places. And I think it's you don't know if they have been hurt in their life by the church in the past. You don't know what their story is. I don't know what James Tallarico's relationship to his faith is. I just know that he is clearly someone that is searching for truth, and he has not yet found it, but he thinks he has. And so I think that's both sad but also encouraging to us as Christians to engage with people we know that believe in this woke version of Christianity and ask them questions about, well, why do you believe that? And
unless you work for a certain coffee company and you get fired.
Unless you're Paige Rogers and then you've lost your job and you need to call for celebrity. But she was doing exactly what I guess I'm challenging the listeners to do, is just talk to people and find out.
Have a conversation and ask questions. I think Jesus asked more questions than he answered, and I've always used that as an illustration. Well, Dr. Merrill Matthews, let's talk about tariffs, and let us count the ways. 1, 2, 3. Tariffs were supposed to be something that would actually be paid by other countries, and you take that on, that would reduce the trade deficit. That didn't work out so well. And it was also to boost U.S. manufacturing. So are we 0 for 3? What do we got in terms of those 3 particular justifications?
Well, and you might say 0 for 4, because the Supreme Court decided against his use of IEEPA tariffs, so he's moved to another one. But yes, this is something that's puzzled me for some time, because Donald Trump has frequently said that other countries will pay the tariffs. And it's very clear, you don't have to pick up an economics textbook to find out who pays tariffs, but it's also Ford Motor Company, General Motor Company. General Motors has both come out and said they spend about $2 billion in tariffs in 2025. And more than 1,000 companies sued the administration. This was before the Supreme Court decision came down, hoping to get their tariffs that they paid back if the Supreme Court went against the president, as it did. And they're now getting those monies back. The government's slowly returning those tariffs. And that has actually, for some companies, are saying we're actually having a banner year this year, because we're getting back several $1 billion in tariffs we had not anticipated getting back, and now we're getting it back, and that makes our profit line looks better. So that's one issue. The second thing is the president uses this in part to try to encourage manufacturing here. And I will argue on a lot of things we should be manufacturing here,
Right.
especially things having to do with national security and so forth. He's tried to bring that back. A lot of companies have come and said, we're going to be building more manufacturing here. We're going to be moving there. But a lot of these promises are years long in the making. I mean, it's going to take years to do that. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if some of the companies are saying, well, we've got some people out spotting places for us to build the manufacturing. But they all know President Trump's going to be out in 2 years. Mm-hmm. And so do you want to spend billions of dollars creating a manufacturing facility and hub and so forth when it may not, you may have a Democrat in 2 years. So that's another issue. And the thing was, it was going to pay down a lot of our debt. I've heard the president say we're going to end the budget deficit that we have with the tariffs. You're not going to get anywhere near that. There's, depending upon how you count it, $130, $160 billion. Our budget deficit had been according to a month ago, $1.9 trillion this year. They've now just bumped it up, saying it's going to be maybe $2.1 trillion for this year, mm-hmm. and we're just about to cross $40 trillion in federal debt. Yeah. So the tariffs were never going to get anywhere near that. They could have paid it down a little bit, but this is money that we're taking from Americans, and now it's going back to Americans. So President Trump has got a lot of problems with this, and now he's moving to another version of the tariffs. They're much lower than they were on most cases. So will it affect the prices? Maybe a little bit. But for the most part, those people who had to pay higher prices that were passed on to them by companies, they're not getting the tariff money back. It's the companies that are getting the money back.
Let's give a history lesson before we take a break, and that is that he wanted to create the External Revenue Service,
yes.
The Internal Revenue Service. And the argument was, well, we used to pay for the government with tariffs. But if I remember right, Dr. Merrill Matthews ran the numbers months and months ago, really almost a year ago, about the fact that even with the most optimistic tariffs, we wouldn't be able to fund the government.
We take about $5 trillion in revenue. We're spending about $7 trillion.
That's right.
And tariffs have been, and they've been higher these past couple of years than they were before, but they're still in the neighborhood of under $200 billion. So it's nowhere near what we're going to be spending.
As I often like to say, when we talk about trillions, it's hard to get a handle on that. But Holly, I sometimes take the zeros off. And imagine if you're making $50,000 a year and you're spending $70,000 a year, right, and you have a $400,000 credit card bill. You can see the problem the United States is dealing with.
Yes, I am very woefully underqualified in economics compared to the table guests here, but I do know enough to know if you were following that personal financial plan, it is not going to go well.
It is not going well.
It is not going well. Well, again, we won't push you on the economic issues, but we will come back and talk about some of the legal ones. But I think it's also a perfect setup for Betsy McCoy. We've had her on. It's been a while since we've had her on. Beware tax the rich, because this is always the answer. Okay, if we're not bringing in money from tariffs, I know, we'll just tax the rich. Let's talk about that right after these important messages.
I'm sure that you've noticed that social media is now filled with information generated by AI. Dramatic descriptions of politicians and music stars supposedly making statements about a current issue, leaning into the microphone, looking into the lens, opponents silenced. It's powerful, it's riveting, and it's all lies. Even several national television networks were recently found using enhanced pictures, meaning manipulated, falsified, literally not giving a true picture. So many liars, so much deception. Where can we turn for truth? Right here. From Kerby and the team at Point of View, we need your support. Please join the Point of View Truth Team today with a monthly gift of $30 or more. Together, we can shine the light of truth and dispel the darkness and deception of this day. Give now at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151, pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again in studio, Holly Randall and Dr. Merrill Matthews, and very good piece by Betsy McCoy. It's been a while since we've had her on the program. One time, I think, was Lieutenant Governor of the state of New York. And of course, an expert like you in the medical ethics areas.
Wrote a piece in what has been about 1993 that turned the whole Clinton healthcare situation on its head.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was one of those things that was very interesting as well. Hillary Care at the time, you know.
Yes.
That's before we had Obamacare, so we won't even get into all of that. But her piece is Tax the Rich. Now, I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had a dress that said Tax the Rich.
A $4,000 dress.
Yeah, so see, she even remembers the number. That's what and I think why I wanted to put this in here is for no other reason than you're going to hear this. If indeed you are concerned about budget deficits, and very few Republicans or Democrats seem to be concerned about budget deficits, we just, I think, eliminated the idea that tariffs are going to help us with the deficit. And the idea that we're going to have anything austerity, well, you just saw Doge. That didn't go anywhere. So the answer that comes from especially the socialists, but also a lot of other individuals, is that we certainly need to tax the rich. And it's become a battle cry for some time. And Dr. Merrill Matthews, as you pointed out just a minute ago, if we are now at the $40 trillion national debt level, and we actually spend more money on the interest to the debt than we do on the Defense Department, we do have a problem.
We do have a problem. And just so the listeners understand, occasionally politicians, some kind of theme or fad hits them, and they all pick up on it, and then you hear nothing but that. And tax the rich has become the new one for the Democrats. And so they look at various kinds of ways to do this. So we're going to tax we're going to pose a higher tax on your home if you've got a very expensive home, or for your extra home and New York is trying to do that now, or your assets. They just look for some way to try to get a new tax in there for the rich, because they know it sells fairly well with average Americans, and it looks like something that they can pass, and that way they can say, we're going to take care of spending, lower the government, or we're going to balance the budget or something with this extra tax. It never gets anywhere near that, but that's what they say.
Well, and I think, first of all, let me just mention that recently I was in a couple of these states, New York, Connecticut. You know, the Connecticut Democrats are pushing through a mansion tax.
Right.
Of course, we've been out in California where you have Proposition 40, which would be the so-called Billionaire Tax Act. So you're really talking about all sorts of groups simultaneously saying, well, look at how much money these individuals make and how much their assets are. But if you read far enough down, you recognize that only 2.7% of a billionaire's wealth is in something that's easily, if you will, liquid. Jewels, yachts, artwork, homes, whatever. Most of it is tied up in stock and ownership, right?
And that's why if you have a wealth tax, which some of them have proposed, then you would be able to go after art, stocks, bonds, and other things, so that you would bring in all those other assets and you would try to evaluate what they're worth, and then even if they're not worth nearly that much later, and then use that for the tax basis.
What I do not understand about all of this is how people advocating for this system think that if they begin instituting a wealth tax, call it the Taylor Swift tax, call it the wealth tax, the mansion tax, whatever these ideas we've got going on in here, there will not be any more people left to tax after you institute this, right? Like, one of the reasons I love living in Texas is that we do not pay state income tax here. Right. That is the reason people want to live here. If they ended that, people might leave here. Yeah. So if you have a mansion in Rhode Island and suddenly that mansion starts costing you an exorbitant amount of money, which she apparently does.
I was just in Rhode Island. That's called the Taylor Swift tax right now, in case you're not familiar.
I imagine if they start heavily taxing her, she is a very savvy-minded businesswoman. she will not have a mansion in Rhode Island anymore, left for them to tax. So it seems like, again, my last economics class was my senior year of high school, but I know enough to know if you tax the rich, there will be no more rich to tax.
Capital flight.
Feels that simple.
Yes.
One of the things that's happening is higher income people, are very wealthy people, are leaving New York, leaving California, going to Florida, going to Texas, maybe going to Tennessee, none of which has a state income tax. And because if you're making several $1 million and you're in New York, you're paying a huge state income tax. You're also paying a huge property tax, and if they with Mayor Mamdani's pied-à-terre tax, taxing homes that are second homes for them.
Right.
They already pay the taxes for those homes, but they want to put an additional tax on them.
The tax.
A tax on the tax. And so they're pushing back on that. But it is, at some point you say, I'm going to move to someplace where I don't have to pay all these taxes.
Yeah, and I'm going to sell my home in New York that's subject to this special tax along the way. I'm going to buy one in Texas.
And one of the other issues, and we've seen this before, is when they go after the so-called ultra-wealthy, sooner or later it works its way down to the middle class. Right. Because oftentimes those people that are wealthy have all sorts of tax benefits, a battery of lawyers, trusts and other things that make it even more difficult for you to extract it from them. And so many times, many of the listeners, to point of view right now, middle class, end up paying for some of the things that were supposed to be wealth tax.
Yeah, remember the Trump tax returns drama from however many years ago that was? People were so upset that he had not paid, but a small fraction of his wealth in tax dollars. And I just remember thinking, I don't know that this is Donald Trump's fault. If you're upset about that, you need to take a look at the tax code, because what he was doing was using the means that were made available to him by the people that you elected. So it just seems like there's always some sort of logic missing from these conversations that people forget.
Yeah, it's interesting because when they pass tax increases, they almost always create some kind of element where people can get out of paying those taxes some way or the other legally, so that they don't have to do it. And even if you're doing a second tax on people's homes, that you're living in Florida but you're up in New York occasionally, then what they do, or they'll just change their pattern, and maybe they'll say they live in New York and do something else. They'll change their pattern so that they avoid the taxes. Sometimes it's legal, sometimes it may be a little sketchy on some of these things, but people look for ways to not pay taxes. Most of our listeners are happy to pay the taxes I'll say happy, are willing to pay the taxes they owe, but they look for ways to minimize their tax so that they're paying what they owe, but under the illegal exemptions that they get.
One of the reasons you have Dan Pilla on every once in a while to help people. But again, we're talking about Rhode Island, Connecticut, Washington, D.C., California. Just another mention, California is actually voting on Proposition 40. So some of you might be in states like Rhode Island saying, well, I can't seem to get anybody in Providence to hear or maybe people in Hartford, Connecticut aren't listening to me. But there's a few places where you can vote. But there also is interesting because the definition of rich has changed a little bit. Have you noticed with Bernie Sanders, he used to talk about those millionaires, and then
Bernie Sanders became one.
And now we're worried about the billionaires and not the millionaires. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
And so again, these are some things that I think we just need to pay attention to. Again, our commentary today is on the whole idea of discernment, and I think you just need to have a fair amount of discernment, but also to recognize, even if you were to try to get as much gold out of the golden goose as you can possibly squeeze out of it, there's some limitation, which is in the second to the last piece. And that is, for many of these individuals, they say, well, look at Elon Musk. Yeah, well, it's all tied up in stocks and in Tesla and SpaceX and whatever. It's not, if you look at kind of the Spartan lifestyle that maybe not, he's more, but even Jeff Bezos, okay, yeah, he's got wonderful yachts and things like that. But there's a fair number of individuals that are very wealthy individuals, but they're wealthy on paper. And the only way you could extract that from them is to force them to sell the stock. And if you're selling the stock at pennies on the dollar, you're not helping the economy. So some people need to think through that as well.
Yeah, and the solution can't just be let's start taxing these people. It also has to be let's also look at where we're spending money. You have to attack it from all sides. And we, like you mentioned that at the beginning of this segment, we tried Doge and it sort of fell a little flat. I mean, it had great intentions, and I don't know what the solution to that is, but the people advocating for tax the rich are also the people advocating for let's expand government programs. Yeah. Let's spend more and more money. Let's send more money to XYZ thing. The math doesn't add up there.
Yeah. Well, we need to take a break, and when we come back, a couple of other quick comments, since we are talking about, in some cases, blue states and blue cities. Penna Dexter's piece is on blue city results, and just a couple other quick summaries, and also maybe some prayer targets, because I always like to talk about some things that we can be praying for. We, of course, have Pray for America, but Holly can also remind us of, I think you're looking for the Supreme Court to react positively for a couple of cases. So we will talk about some of those prayer targets right after this.
Blue cities throughout the U.S. are struggling. Sometimes their solutions are making their problems worse. Conservative scholar and journalist Christopher Rufo convened 4 focus groups with voters in Los Angeles and San Francisco. He and his team were trying to find out how to persuade voters to support policies that will truly help their cities. They found that terminology is important. The use of phrases such as illegal aliens and law and order are seen as right-wing coded terms which can immediately shut down constructive discussion. Better, he says, to define problems as rooted in failures of care and concern. What Mr. Rufo's team gleaned from these focus groups is that it's important to frame the issue carefully and then offer common-sense solutions that will survive in progressive urban settings that are most in need of sound conservative governance. Case in point, San Francisco. When Daniel Lurie became mayor in 2025, the city was plagued with carjackings, robberies, gun assaults, smash-and-grab shoplifting, and homeless encampments. A tool that might have helped solve the crime problem was prohibited in 2019, when San Francisco became the first major city to ban police from using facial recognition technology. Crime shot up, exacerbating the exodus of families and businesses from the Bay Area. In an article for The Washington Post, San Francisco real estate investor Max Raskin says Mayor Lurie, a Democrat, has eased restrictions on the use of drones and facial recognition for law enforcement, effectively reversing the 2019 ordinance, and passed a kitchen sink ballot initiative that gave flexibility to the city's police department. Mayor Lurie also launched an initiative to increase police hiring and has worked in cooperation with federal and state officials to get drugs and dealers off the streets. This Democrat mayor of the country's most liberal city is implementing the conservative principle that says if you get crime right, everything else will follow. Max Raskin says it's working. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, one of the things we do right now is to give you a chance, if you're especially listening on the computer, to actually hear the commentary by Penna Dexter. If you sign up to receive the commentaries, you receive mine in your inbox Monday through Friday. Penna's on Saturday. One of the things she's talking about is blue city results and talks about Christopher Rufo, who we've certainly quoted many times on this program. Sometimes if you're going to have a conversation with voters in Los Angeles or San Francisco or a variety of other places, because you need to avoid certain kinds of phrases. But in the midst of this, it even talks about the current mayor of San Francisco, who I've been paying attention to, interestingly enough, wanted to ease restrictions on the use of drones and facial recognition for law enforcement, but at the same time address some of those issues that we've talked about before. Our take action item, if you aren't familiar, is again one which came from Representative Keith Self about to protect our privacy through some of these flock cameras. So that take action item is there, but I thought it was interesting that even in San Francisco, some of the issues we're talking about are there. Next week, by the way, I just might mention Monday is on Christian worldview, Tuesday on gender dysphoria, all sorts of very important topics. But what about this? Because Christopher Rufo, who's worked with the Manhattan Institute and has written some very good books, including one on just the whole cultural change that has been taking place in our society, recognizes that if you're going to get anywhere in some of the conversations with your fellow leftists, especially in blue cities, using right-wing terms like illegal aliens, and I didn't know this was a right-wing term, law and order, aren't going to work you so well. But if nothing else, I think that if you're going to build some bridges, rather than trying to build some barriers, it just is an illustration, again, that many of these cities are dealing with carjackings and smash and grab, shoplifting and the rest, and homeless encampments. And sometimes you can find some common ground conversations, can't you?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a good reminder to always be discerning, I guess, in those conversations about the way that I guess the way that your language works. I have a little bit of like caution on that, his advice there, because I think it could easily become a slippery slope of, well, I should be using gender obscuring pronouns, or I should be, so there's kind of a delicate balance, I think, that people have to say, like, do I need to use the word illegal alien? I don't know, but do I need to not use pronouns that are false? Yeah. I need to be very careful about that, and I do not want to use gender obscuring pronouns. So I think it's just I guess I'm promoting your word of the day, discernment. Yeah. Like our woke Christianity conversation, it all comes down to knowing truth and discerning how to act in circumstances without compromising that truth.
Some of the things that happen in terms of terms that are acceptable to the left, how that happens. So if you're talking to somebody, and several of the large cities in California have huge homeless problems. Yeah. But homeless is not the word you want to use. Unhoused population. Why unhoused is acceptable and homeless isn't doesn't make any sense. It seems
6 one way, half a dozen the other to me, right? Is there
illegal alien versus undocumented immigrant or something like that? But some of those things are just big issues for them. But many of them are struggling with some of these issues within those cities. Right. And so if you're talking to somebody and you're willing to change the language just a little bit, you might be able to have a good conversation. I don't know why some of these things become big issues for them, and they consider you a hater if you say a homeless person rather than an unhoused person, but it does.
One of the things I always like to do is talk about our prayer deal and prayer issues. And of course, we have Pray for America, and the one that just came out recently was just to remind you of everything that's in the Democratic Socialists of America agenda, the platform. And one of those, I'd just love to get your thoughts for just a minute, Holly, is that we've been from First Liberty warning people all the time about the attempt to pack the Supreme Court. But if you read that carefully, you recognize they just say, I got a better idea. Let's just get rid of the Supreme Court.
Well, they're going to run into the Constitution on that one. Unfortunately, that's going to stand in their way. But yeah, that's definitely something that listeners should be on guard for, is sort of covert and veiled attempts to undermine the court's ability to protect our liberty and our Constitution. We can see it in any country that has tried it. I mean, Venezuela is the prime example. Start packing the court, you start losing your freedom left and right. So it's just something for people to watch, pay attention to.
And that's why my piece in the Hill from a few weeks ago was, can a Democratic Socialist truthfully take the oath of office?
Yes.
Right. Because if you're there to undermine, if you're going to get rid of the executive branch, put the president under Congress, if you're going to get rid of the Supreme Court and put it under Congress, you're essentially messing with Article 1, 2, and 3
all
of the Constitution.
It's like they went bowling with the Constitution.
Those are the key points. Yeah. So you couldn't, if you can't truthfully say I'm here to support and defend the Constitution if you mean to essentially undermine it. Yeah. So that's one of the key issues. And I noticed, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I think the Democratic Socialists of America just had their annual meeting. Mm-hmm. Last year, they put their agenda up so you could see all the topics of the things they were meeting. This year, they did not do that. So I was going through looking for, okay, what are the topics? It doesn't say. It's just going to say we're going to be meeting at this time and this time and this time. And presumably, if you were there in Chicago at the meeting, you would get a handout that would show you but you couldn't find it online. And I suspect they're getting wise to us, though a lot of the Democratic Socialists of America, especially some of the leaders, are going on the media and saying, yeah, of course we want to get rid of the Supreme Court. Yes, we want to get rid of the executive branch. They are very clear in talking. And yes, we wanted to get rid of the police. It may be a long-term goal, but we want to get rid of that. Some of them are being very truthful about what they're doing, and that's going to raise some questions with a lot of Americans.
If you go on our website, you can even just maybe type in Megan Romer, who is the vice president of the Democratic Socialists of America. We posted one a while back in which she actually was interacting with some individuals on Fox News, but the one I posted the other day was interacting with somebody from the New Yorker. So in one case, you obviously maybe are in, quote, hostile territory, but still check, yes. And then you go to the New Yorker, where at one point it was just almost embarrassing because then he would ask a follow-up question, which was even more embarrassing because it was pretty obvious that we are dealing with people that are really good with the slogans, but Holly, they're not really good with public policy or even understanding the implications of the policy.
No, I think one of the most interesting shifts has to see the commentator Bill Maher, who's a Democrat.
Yes, that's a good example.
And he is harshly critical of the Democratic Socialists of America platform because it's, to him, ruining the Democratic Party that he's been a member of. So it's interesting to see sort of the interfighting among the left.
Which is why Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says she is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, the local chapter in New York,
right.
but not the national body, because she may be wanting to run for president. She wants to be careful about that.
Yeah, I think so. Nevertheless, I just thought it would be very good. Do you have any cases before the Supreme Court? Because I always like to encourage people to pray for First Liberty, and I know you have a couple. Of course, we have a victory with Valerie Klosterman, and that one we talked about last week, but anything else that we can pray for?
The Supreme Court is in a period right now where they're in recess. So what they're not doing is deciding cases on the merits, but what they're doing is they're watching and they're planning, what are we going to hear next fall? So thousands and thousands and thousands of people petition the Supreme Court every year for them to hear their case, and they usually land somewhere around 50 of those, some 6,000 odd. So they are in a period right now where tons of those petitions are hitting the desks of the justices to consider, do we do something about that? And First Liberty has, at least in my time involved with the company, a record amount of those petitions up there.
Yes.
Just like Bethany Hall that we talked about at the beginning of the show, asking the court, hey, go fix this bad precedent or change this bad ruling or correct this part of the law that's been sort of out of line. And so we are just prayerful that they will see and hear those petitions and want to do something about them.
Again, pray for Bethany Hall and pray for First Liberty. And I thank both of you for being here today. Most always, I like to thank Megan for help engineering the program. Derek, thank you for producing the program. See you on Monday when we talk about worldview right here on Point of View.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.